Well, thank you, Paige, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in today's webinar. Adrian, can I get you to say hello also so people can dial in on your voice?
Certainly. Hello, everyone from Los Angeles, where we've just recently had some rain, and much welcomed.
Fantastic. Well, everyone, we want to reach out to you and thank you for joining us. Adrian and I have bumped into each other a number of times at different conferences and enjoyed conversation and found that it's a stimulating and interesting little niche here that we are both involved in. From my point of view, the association is making the tough choices, and from Adrian's point of view, the board members trying to avoid making foolish choices and being wise about what they do. And so we intersect on this subject, and we thought it'd be a great opportunity for us to have an interesting little discussion and invite you guys all into basically our living room as we're talking about this. Adrian and I enjoy speaking to groups of people. And since we're all scattered across the country in this situation, and as Paige mentioned, we've muted everyone to keep the noise down in the background, we've got a dialog box you can see on your screen, not literally the one on your screen, but off in your control panel on the side. If at any point in time you have a question for one of us, by all means, just type it right in, and Paige will be monitoring that through our session today. And if at any point in time you been asked to respond to something, if Adrian and I have a question for you, the way you can respond is to digitally raise your hand. It's not that we will stop and try to answer your question. We'll do that at the end, but this is a way we can get a little bit of feedback from you. And so let's do a test at this point in time. Can I get everyone to grab their mouse and give me a hands raised click, please? Let me know you're ready for us to start the session. Got it. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to put everyone's hands down. And another word before we get going is that although we trust that you are taking notes, we are recording this session and expect to have it online for follow-up reference. And we'll be sending out an outline to those of you who are so kind to fill out an end of session survey at the end. But without further delay, let's get going on the session. And it all boils down to board members, the kind of decisions that they're chartered with making. So Adrian, can I get you to open us out with a little discussion about board member responsibility, please?
Yes. Yeah, this is true for all 50 states, though it's not just California, and that is the nature of common interest developments, and that is that they have common areas. And the primary responsibility for boards of directors are to oversee and maintain those common areas, because somebody has to do it. So on behalf of the membership, they elect a board, and the board has to maintain those areas. Well, that being the primary responsibility, there are secondary ones that go with that. The second one being the duty to assess. So they're required to assess, and in California by law, sufficient to carry out their responsibilities. So they have to be able to assess the membership to raise the money to maintain the common areas. Well, that leads then to the third point, and that is, how do you know what you need to maintain in the common areas? What are the components? What's their lifespan, and what do they cost? And that's where the reserve studies come in. And I know in California it's mandated by law. I suspect that's the case in the other 49 states. Robert, are there legal requirements for them to do reserve studies?
Yeah, I think we're up to 26 states now have statutes that require some type of either reserve planning or reserve disclosure.
Okay. I thought that might be the case. And even for those states that don't have mandated by law, there's still the practical need to actually inventory and find out what you have, so you know what you need to maintain and what it's going to cost you. And then the fourth element, or fourth duty as a board member, board members have a duty to actually spend the money. They can't go through this entire process and know what they need to maintain but then refuse to do it. So they have to actually spend that money once they've raised it on doing the actual maintenance of the common areas. So that, in a nutshell, describes what their duties are, which basically leads into everything else in this webinar, because it all flows from those duties.
That's a good point. I like your last point there, because so many people have heard so many times you need to set reserves aside, you need to set reserves aside, and how hard it is to collect reserves. And I don't think they've heard as much counsel to spend it.
Yes. Yeah, and it's nice to have a big war chest, but it's a bad idea to just sit on it and not use it, because that will get you into trouble as well.
And speaking about trouble, as a board member, your name is on the list of who is in charge of the association or who is running the association, and you've got board meeting notes that document things, and board members need to be pretty careful about their decisions because they are going to be measured, and those are reasonably well documented, and their role is very different as a board member than it is as a homeowner.
Yes, it is. As homeowners, they don't really have much in the way of any obligations or fiduciary duties to anybody. But once a homeowner is elected to the board of directors, that all changes. And then by law, they become a fiduciary. They're responsible to make reasonable decisions on behalf of the members, and those decisions get recorded in the minutes. And so if they're making very bad or very foolish decisions, as you show on your bar here, that can get them sued. And I can tell you the number of lawsuits that I've been in as an expert, where I've reviewed those minutes of the association's board, and you can see in them a really bad pattern that can get the board, make the association liable. Or on the other end, it's going to show that they're making good decisions and it actually protects them. So those minutes then become a shield for them, and that shows that they were exercising good judgment, which leads us to the business judgment rule. Because it's that rule which across all 50 states, that's the rule that's going to guide how the courts view the decisions made by the board. And there are just three elements to the rule. And one, when the board sits down and makes a decision, are they doing it in the best interest of the association? So they have to set aside their own interest. And the decision they may be making may be contrary to their own interest. But as long as it's in the best interest of the association, that element is met. The second is, before they've made that decision, have they engaged in reasonable inquiry or due diligence? Because they have to investigate before they can make a decision. And then when they make that decision, it has to be in good faith in the best interest of the association. So that reasonable inquiry is where the reserve studies come in, because they have to go through that process in order to know what they need to maintain, what it's going to cost them, and how to set aside those funds in order to meet the maintenance requirements.
Well, Adrian, I've heard you say before that you don't have to be perfect as a board member. In fact, you can make mistakes, but as long as you're trying your best, and isn't this a way to measure if you're trying your best?
Yes. Yeah, the courts, thank goodness, they don't judge based on what was the outcome. They're making, when it comes to the liability of the directors, you can have make a bad decision that results in a big loss to the association and a judgment, of $100,000 against the association. Well, as long as the board followed the business judgment rule, the directors are not going to be personally liable. They're allowed to make mistakes or to make and the court has even said in case law, they would have made a different decision if it had been up to them, but they're going to defer to the board of directors because they followed the business judgment rule.
Yeah, we don't want them to make mistakes, but board members don't have to live in fear of making mistakes if they're going down this path and acting in good faith, reasonable inquiry, best interest. Okay, fantastic. Well, how does that change if you're a manager instead of being a board member?
Well, managers don't have a fiduciary duty. They don't have a legal obligation to the membership like the board members do, but they have a different role to play. They're the ones with the experience, the knowledge, the awareness of what the laws are, and the best management practices, and so they're the ones advising board members and letting them know, what, you're required to do a reserve study, or you're required to, we got to get the budget ready, and here are the deadlines for doing the budget, and you need to remember that we've got roofs that are going to have to be replaced here before too long. So they act, in advisory capacity to the board of directors, and they have an obligation to raise these things with the board so that the board is aware, because they're volunteers. They don't necessarily know this stuff.
Yeah, I see managers, from my point of view, as like being the coach. The board members are the players out in the field actually doing it, and they're the ones with the responsibility to execute, but the coaches can advise and shape and counsel and prepare them for success.
That's a good analogy. I like that.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get right into it. Let's start with the expense side of things. There's the real bills that need to get paid. These are the costs that need to get offset with income. And as we talk about the real bills, let's divide them into two types of bills. There's the operational budget, that's the daily, weekly, monthly, and the reserve budget. Do you see it pretty clearly that way too?
Yeah, no, it's clear that those are the two great divides, because you've got your daily business, ongoing day-to-day operational expenses, and that goes in the operating budget. Reserves are for the longer-term cyclical repairs that need to be done. Where I see boards fall down is that the operating budget is pretty demanding, is pretty clear, and is pressing on them all the time. The reserve is not so much. And what happens is they sometimes neglect putting aside the monies into reserves, and that is a problem that will come and get them later.
Yeah, the question is, what's discretionary? As you have a tight budget, how much flexibility do you have? And it may be tough to say that we'll stop doing this on the operating budget, but if you are not seeing, well, next slide. In the first year, this is a picture of reserve expenses at an association through the years. In the first year, their reserve expenses are pretty darn low. Maybe all they're doing is just maybe the patio furniture out at the pool. The board sometimes gets lulled into the thought that, well, that's all there is, and so why are we setting so much money aside? And they have to be reminded that it's a multi-decade picture here, and you need to get ready for all these big expenses. And so as you're talking about, or as our boards are trying to figure out how much flexibility, how much room they have some room on the operating side, maybe deciding how many times per week they want the hallways vacuumed, maybe how many times they want the pool serviced per week, how many hours of security service, what days of security service. Obviously they have levels of service, or even management. Do they want full management or financial management? All those kinds of things can affect their operational budget. But when we think of here at Association Reserves, when we think of reserves, those are very well-defined projects, and they're all, if you average them out, they're all deteriorating very evenly over time. And we try to counsel our clients that it's like a pace line that you see in a swimming race or a track race that shows the pace that they need to keep up with to accomplish something. If you're not setting the funds aside at the appropriate level with respect to reserves, you're going to get behind. And we want to encourage you to think that just because you're not seeing a big expense this year, that doesn't mean that they've gone away. They're all there, and you need to be working on them and making sure you don't end up into a...
Let me comment on that. The discretionary part that you pointed out, it normally falls within the operational budget. The number of times you vacuum the hallways. And the worst that's going to happen is the homeowners start complaining that the hallways aren't as clean as they used to be. And what happens is boards tend to respond to that, and so they reinstitute the cleaning, the vacuuming of the hallways, and they cut back on their reserves. And the reason is nobody complains about the reserve cutbacks.
Good point.
Because it doesn't hit them immediately. And what happens is they get away with it for a while, but then at some point it's going to hit them, and hit them hard, because they're going to have to do large special assessments or put large increases in their reserve contributions, which means dues increases. And so the reserves are something that should not be neglected. They really need to pay attention to them when they're doing their budgeting.
Yeah, people need to understand that the reserve deterioration that needs to get offset is a bill as real as any other bill they have at the association.
Absolutely.
And we all know what happens when you don't have enough money to pay those bills. If you haven't been setting enough money aside, you run out of money and you have those special assessments. And so that's a big problem. But what drives the boards to need to make the tough decisions? And we've got a slide here on governing documents. Adrian, can I get you to address this?
Yeah, this is an association I represented, is an expert in the case. I didn't represent them in general counsel, but they had this in their CC&Rs, and requiring that they maintain the common areas in a first-class condition. And the board didn't do that. What they did was they kept everything else going, the day-to-day operations I mentioned earlier, and they didn't make contributions into reserves. They were concerned because the population was mostly elderly and they were on fixed income, and so they didn't want to raise the assessments. Well, that worked for a number of years until the roof started leaking, and when they started, it happened in a very big way with a lot of interior unit damage throughout the complex. And then the lawsuits started flying. And the boards really need to pay attention not to just common sense, but what do their documents say? And if they're saying something like this, first-class condition, which I find problematic in a document, I'd rather it say good condition. In fact, in the trial, the judge spent time with me on the stand just asking me, what does it mean, first-class condition? And it's like, how do you answer that?
Yeah,
because
that's got to be hard.
Yeah, when I say that the client's in trouble. So if everyone on listening to this broadcast needs to go look at their documents and see what's it say in them. And if it's saying first-class condition, they probably need to amend their documents. If it does, they need to look at their reserves and see where do they stand on their maintenance cycles, and are they keeping everything in a first-class condition?
Right. They need to. That's very important counsel that you're giving. That they need to know not just what they've learned here in a webinar today, but what do their governing documents define that they must do as board members.
Right.
Okay. Next point I want to make is we talked a little bit about the flexibility that an association might have on the expense side with the operating budget, and I want to make sure people understand that in some or with some components they have some flexibility on the expenses in their reserves. There's different types of failures that we categorize. There's things that are as simple as inconsequential failures where it fails and sometimes you might not even know. That might be a pool heater that stops functioning finally. We may predict it in the reserve study, but don't be proactive and replace that. You may squeeze another year or two out of it. So there's inconsequential, wait and see. That takes us to the reevaluate. That might be a perimeter wood fence. If you walk up, give it a shake test, and it's still pretty sturdy, then let it go. Don't be proactive on that. Don't tear down a perfectly good fence. If you have a lobby or a rec room, be aware that it's a stylistic issue. You don't want it to become obsolete, but obviously you have some flexibility about modernizing it or upgrading those types of things this year or next year or maybe even the year after. But when you get to components that have to do with protection, maybe a gate system or entry intercom system, you want to be careful that those things don't get broken and not function for an extended period of time. And of course, catastrophic things that might be a fire alarm system or a hot water boiler, just the opposite of a pool heater that's inconsequential, but a hot water boiler is catastrophic. Those are the kind of things you want to be proactive on. So you have choices on the reserve study side, and you need to be wise about those types of expenses too.
Yeah, they get a little bit of flexibility, like you said, because if a water heater goes out for the pool, people will complain, but they're not going to sue you. If the boilers fail, I've heard complaints about my health. I have to go to the doctor because I can't take a hot shower. I'm going to lose work. I mean, all kinds of things start coming up, and they're threatening lawsuits. So on a boiler, you don't want to wait till it fails. That you want to replace before it fails. Whereas the water heater for the pool, you can wait until it fails and then replace it, and it's not going to matter.
Right, right. Well, another thing to do is we've been talking about spending money and focusing on limiting spending money, but there's times and some important times when it's important to actually spend the money and do the preventive maintenance.
Yes, yeah, and this is a perfect example, your picture here of the asphalt, because had they spent the money to seal that properly, they wouldn't be getting this. And the cost numbers, you can tell everybody what it's going to cost to fix this now that it's in this condition versus if they had just done the preventive maintenance.
Yeah, real simple numbers. The cost to seal asphalt compared to removing and replacing asphalt is about a 10-to-1. The same with painting some wood trim or the window frames on the siding of the association. Painting is about 1/10 the cost of replacing. And associations that think that they're saving money by not painting or not sealing or not sealing a deck, things like that, they're really making foolish decisions because they're inviting a cost that's 10 times the size of the appropriate maintenance.
Yeah, plus they run the risk of somebody's going to, like in that puddles that you see, step into that, twist an ankle, now you got a broken ankle and a lawsuit over that. So it's just from a safety as well as a cost thing that they're better off fixing it.
Yeah, so there's times that you really want to make sure that you're spending money at the right time. Well, we need to turn the corner and talk about now the income side of things. Talked about expenses. So on the income side of things, the first thing we want to do is make sure that associations, and specifically board members, aren't just throwing their hands up in the air and saying, we can't afford it.
Yeah, if they're saying that, meaning they can't afford to put money into reserves, that's a huge mistake. Because I've seen it, and I've had boards come to me and say, we're so proud that we haven't raised dues in 10 years. And that's just asking for trouble, because what's going to happen is, well, the budget, first of all, is shrinking because it's not keeping up with inflation. And if they're sacrificing by not putting money into reserve, that will hit at some point when the roofs all need to be replaced or some other major component has to be replaced. Then they're looking at special assessments and dues increases. One association I represented was faced with 20% dues increases on the annual budget and a $75,000 special assessment.
Ouch.
In order to deal with all of the deferred, and it was extensive deferred maintenance throughout the buildings. So it's much cheaper in the long run to put small amounts of money, continue to put them into reserves, than to cut off and not put any monies in.
Yeah, well, it's important for the overall budget. And I think of situations where the board members get distracted thinking about, well, let's talk about a 20-unit association where they have a couple of people that maybe are on fixed income or having financial concerns, and the board starts running the association trying to protect those two owners. Well, whether it's 2 out of 20 or 2 out of 100, the board still needs to understand number one, their job is not to make people happy, and number two, their job is to run the association, not cater to the needs of the minority.
Right. Their legal obligation is to the membership as a whole, not to the two who can't pay their bills.
Yeah, that may be just one of the, well, almost like you were saying, gradually, if you're in the pattern of raising assessments a little bit every year, then people can expect it and they can see the future that, wow, given that my income is stable, then I can probably stay here for a couple more years, and then I may need to sell my place and move to somewhere that's less expensive. And you can see that coming up. It's not a crisis situation.
Yeah, whereas if they get comfortable with no dues increases for 10 years, then they get hit with a huge dues increase in special assessment. It's catastrophic to them. So they really need, it's kinder to the membership to do the smaller regular increases to keep pace with inflation than to wait and then hit everybody with huge assessments.
Yeah, and if you look at the numbers, if you dive into the numbers, let's say you've got $250 a month homeowner assessments, a 5% increase would be $1,250 a month. $1,250 a month is a few cents per day. It's less than $1 a day, less than 50 cents a day. And really, that should not be the kind of increase that a board should fear when they're talking about a few cents a day. That's down way cheaper than a premium coffee drink.
Right. A trip to Starbucks, they eliminate one trip to Starbucks and they paid their, the increase in their assessments.
Yeah, a couple times a month, and that's it. So board members need to understand what the real size of the numbers are. It may be big when you're talking about 100 units, but the association needs what it needs to run, and you don't want to be starving the association so a few people can have a few more other coffee drinks or whatever it is.
And as directors, putting themselves at risk individually because they're not following the business judgment rule.
Very good.
And that's what concerns me.
Very good point. Well, we talked about the numbers now. There's another element that caught both of our attention when we were discussing this earlier. Adrian, you want to talk about the kind of the two different roles that the boards have?
Well, members members don't have any obligation to the membership. They pretty much only have a duty to themselves, and that's the way they function. And there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody acts in their own self-interest. And so if you're on fixed income, you're going to be in there at the board yelling at the board not to increase the dues.
Politely.
But well, sometimes not so politely. But as a board, once as a homeowner, you're elected to the board, immediately your status changes. And under the law, you become obligated to act in the best interest of the membership. You have duties under the law, you have duties under the CC&Rs, and your duty is to act in the best interest of the entire membership, not just one or two members. And so if you cater to the noisy minority and don't raise dues, don't fix things, defer maintenance, defer, you're going to end up in litigation at some point, and you may be the target of that litigation for not following the business judgment rule.
Right. And then as a board member, not only is it your job to do the numbers, but if you want to succeed, you need to also be a salesman. And that may mean that you act as a politician and talking about the many ways that you've saved the association some money. And so because of your wisdom and your hard work to put in fluorescent lights instead of the incandescents, you save money in the operating budget, and so the increase is only going to be X dollars per month instead of a higher number. And set that expectation, tell them the good things that are happening, the hard work that you put in, and be a salesman, not just surprise them with a number.
Yes. Yeah, they need to really let the membership know. They need to be transparent. They need to educate the members, let them know what's going on. Because nobody likes an increase, whether taxes or dues or anything else. The difference between what the association does and what the government does is enormous. Taxes, you pay them, and who knows where they go, sometimes the most foolish things. But it's pretty set and pretty clear for associations. It's primarily maintenance issues and things related to that. And if the increase is for maintenance, they can be sure that that's where the money is going to go. It's not going to go to something else. So it's just a matter of making sure that the membership is informed of what they're doing. There's going to be a lot less resistance to that, and some may actually appreciate what you're doing.
I thought we were going to talk the truth and not be fiction here.
Yeah, well, no, it actually happens. There are times when people appreciate it, but boy, I tell you, mostly they complain.
Yeah, mostly they complain, but the truth is being a board member is a hard job. You need to know what the rules are and what the governing documents say and know how to stay protected.
Right, and as long as they're following the business judgment rule, they're going to be protected. They're going to be meeting their obligations both under the governing documents and under the law because they're acting in good faith in the best interest of the association and with reasonable inquiries. So as long as they're doing their due diligence and acting in the best interest of the association as a whole, not individual members, they're going to be fine.
Yeah, acting, not just sitting on their hands, but acting, yeah.
Right. And they can even, under this rule, make a mistake that results in a loss to the association. They get sued and there's damages awarded. They're not going to be individually liable because if they follow the business judgment rule, they're fine. They're not. They don't have to be perfect.
Right.
They just have to follow those three steps.
Well, let me follow up on that. Perfect. They don't have to get it all right. So if you get a big insurance increase or you've had a reserve study update after many years, you find you're behind, you don't have to fix it all at once. It probably took many years to get your association into this situation, so it may take many years to get out. But the key is acting on it, taking a step in the right direction, and well, at least that's my point of view.
Right. Yeah, in fact, a lawsuit that I was involved in another association, that exact situation happened. Prior boards had gotten them in the hole, and where they had next to nothing in the reserves, and the board then initiated and started putting aside monies into reserves, and the next year increased the amount going into reserves, the next year increased the amount into reserves, and then there was a catastrophic failure that nobody anticipated involving drainage systems. And they got sued, and they actually won the lawsuit because the court determined that the board was acting in the best interest of the membership.
They'd started those steps of progress.
Exactly. So as long as you start doing something, you don't have to immediately get out of the hole, you just have to start climbing.
Yeah. So if you're at those $250 a month, courageously go to 265 or whatever the number is, and maybe the next year go up to 280, but be making those steps of progress. You don't have to get all the way there immediately. That may be kind of tough for the average association.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, Adrian, I look at the clock here. Boy, time goes quickly. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you, to share this discussion with all the attendees that we have here today from across the country. I want to close by reminding everyone that we do have a lot of resources available, either on the Association Reserves website, reservestudy.com, or the Adams Kessler website, adamskessler.com. At reservestudy.com, we've got more materials at the Learning Center. If you need a reserve study, you can request a proposal or join our email mailing list at the Adams Kessler website. They have some great resources there, and I want to point you specifically to the davissterling.com link, where that'll take you to davissterling.com, where you can sign up for a page indicated earlier, Adrian's very popular weekly newsletter. And if you are an association that's looking for a few more insights, this is one of those great places. It's a free resource to get expert, wise counsel to fill out your experience base and your insights, and so that you're a little bit better empowered and able to make a wise decision next time that you're faced with a very interesting or perhaps challenging question. And I believe we've got some time for questions and answers. And Paige, can I turn the microphone over to you at this time?